looking out in the audience, there's a couple of faces who I've heard me talk yesterday at Constructing Excellence, so I apologise in advance for an element of repetition. Hopefully for the remaining members of the audience, I'll be able to impart some insight into the thinking behind my review. So probably in terms of the noise that's been created by the review, as Martin alluded to, some of it's about the honesty that I tried to portray in my analysis of construction's problems. The title, Modernise or Die, for me, it was not an accident in any shape or form. It was very much around trying to portray the level of issues that I believe our industry faces going forward, and many of which have been dealt with many times before. And the 10 symptoms of failure that I outline in my review, to many they will be well rehearsed in terms of what's been previously raised by people like Michael Latham, John Egan, Andrew Wolstenholme. And I wasn't expecting there to be any sort of massive, look, I found a new issue that we need to get around and sort out. So, but for the sake of completeness in terms of understanding the issues that our industry are having to face and how we overcome them, it was important to go backwards than to go forwards again. What I would set out though, probably in respect to these sort of 10 areas, is that one I believe has taken on a greater significance than perhaps has been the case in any previous timing of a big report being issued into the industry, and that's that one. So workforce size and demographics for me, as I was starting to undertake the review, assumed an importance that perhaps I wasn't expecting when I started the review. I thought it was all going to be about, you know, how do we deal with collaboration, how do we understand how we're going to rebind the industry and all the fragmentation we have. And don't get me wrong, we have to do all of that, but actually what this represented for me was a burning platform for change. And the size of the challenges we have going forward around the size of our labour force, or more importantly the shrinking size of our labour force, for me took this right to the top of the agenda and very much has flavoured my narrative of this review in the 4 or 5 months since the review was published, in terms of why I'm trying to say to industry, this is different this time. This is not a Latham or Egan moment. This is actually a seminal moment around sorting our industry out. Bearing in mind, when I started this review in February 2016, we were still 4 months or so away from Brexit. And obviously when Brexit happened in the summer, it didn't really change anything that I'd already written. My review was pretty much written in June, even though it took until October to get published because of all the changes of people in Number 10 and different government departments. But actually it's just assumed even more importance. Brexit for me has inflamed the burning platform, if you like, that means we have to do something. We cannot just sit back and, you know, the little bit of noise around the report, it dies into a distant echo and we just do business as usual. This for me is very different. Just to look at business as usual as a backdrop, for me, the skills crisis, which is really what's characterising the core issue that we're facing, and we hear about it every day, we feel it every day, and hopefully you'll sense it's becoming more of an issue and it's actually elevating up, it's becoming more frequent, there's more and more concern about it. If you look at construction costs, and this is a BCIS tender price index and cost index graph going back some time, but in the last 15 years or so, since 2001, what that shows is that costs have gone up about 40% in broad terms, which is the red line. Tender prices, which is the selling price for clients, which is not the same as input costs because the market arbitrates over how it sells its goods and services to clients, has ebbed and flowed in line with economic cycles, particularly after the economic crash in 2007, 2008. But that's gone up as well. So there's a net regression line that's showing that's going up at the moment. What I project is that going forward, because of particularly the labour issues that we are likely to experience, that actually construction price inflation is going to become a hell of a lot more volatile. And I think we're already sensing this in sort of the few months post-Brexit, where obviously we've had an artificial injection of material import price inflation from EU-denominated goods. I think we're going to see more of an issue around labour, even though as economic activity waxes and wanes, and I think we were going to go into a quieter period in the time ahead, and we may even have a relief from labour shortages. So we might even have unemployed bricklayers, which has been something that we haven't seen for many years. Don't be confused, that's a short-term mirage of the structural issues we face in the industry around labour shortages. So it's really important we understand what the medium to long-term impacts are. And what this graph is showing is that we're going to see big volatility. The labour shortages are going to create a very inelastic response to changes in demand profile, in that when there's an increase in demand, the price point will go up very quickly, it will fall very quickly as well, and so it's a much more fractious relationship in terms of how the supply chain is going to react to demand flows going forward. But the net regression line is going to go up. So I think we're going to see exponential rise in net inflation going forward, which means that construction will increasingly become a dominant driver in construction viability. So from a land perspective, from a development return perspective, they're obviously important. But construction, I think, is going to start dominating certain appraisals, certainly in residential, where I would assume most of the audience is working. Housing viability, I think, is going to be more and more driven by construction. Just setting out some of the features as well of what business as usual looks like for me. So my review talks about a prognosis of potentially losing somewhere between 20 and 25% of our workforce. That's purely through attrition linked to ageing, combined with not enough people coming into our industry. That's before the overlay of Brexit, which, based on evidence I've heard in the last couple of months, I think we could lose a third of our workforce if you combine that impact as well. That's subject to how the Article 50 discussions go and any special treatment that construction gets. I also think we're faced with a deterioration in the quality of the labour that's coming into our market. I don't want to overgeneralise, but for me, there is a general dilution of the competence level across not just trades but professionals as well. This is a construction-wide issue for a whole host of different reasons, but I see that as being an issue that means this is more than just headcount. This is not just about how many bodies we've got, it's actually about the competence of those bodies to do what we ask them to do. I think part of what might be driving that, what I've just said, is actually there's an increasing reliance on less and less people to pass on their skills and knowledge. So the training up of people coming into the industry and transfer of knowledge and skills and experience is being borne by a smaller and smaller group of very experienced people that aren't able to convey that skill set. And I think that's a self-perpetuating problem. I think we've now got a situation quite clearly, in my view, and however controversial this might sound, main contractors who don't often build directly anymore through the fragmentation of the model. They manage a process and not in charge of their subcontractors. So actually main contractors making promises to clients about delivery, they're not in control, as they should be, of their outcome, because they're using subcontractors, and those subcontractors in turn are not in control of their workforce because of the casualisation of labour and the high reliance on self-employed labour, which is itinerant and in the current market has been moving around the industry and deciding where to work for the best price point. I think, and again, I'm not wanting to be controversial, but I will be, my view is that designers, through the procurement models that we've adopted in the industry, have become more and more divorced from construction level design. So there's a lot of focus on getting planning consents and adding value for clients, and lots of developers see most value in planning, don't see it necessarily in build. They see build as a risk, but actually there's a big gap in my view as to how some of the technical skills in construction level design are being diluted as well, particularly through the advent of design and build, contractor design portion supplement, etc., etc. This is a big issue that actually leads to failures on site, in my experience. I feel more comfortable saying this because I am a surveyor. Any QSs out there who are saying that they can be absolutely accurate around the construction costs of things in the future are lying to you, because it is pretty much impossible at the moment because of that decoupling between cost and price, and with all of the volatility in the market, to give you predicted outcomes at any point in the medium to long term, certainly. And that is going to get worse, going back to the graph I showed of that volatility. I think we're going to see increased litigation over issues around defects, particularly in the housing market, in terms of failure, whether it be design failure or materials and workmanship failure. I'll come back to that. We're going to see developers and house builders getting sucked into big reputational risk and damage positions, and I'll come back to that as well. And I think you'll see some players just pull out the market in housing. Housing's a really difficult sector in construction. So you've got infrastructure, you've got commercial, you've got public works. Housing, and I've been in it a long time, is one of the most difficult sectors, I believe, to get right in the construction sense from a design and delivery perspective. It's pretty intense, it's pretty unforgiving. Practical completion doesn't really mean practical completion in housing. You're handing over people's properties, whether they rent or buy them, so it's really important that we up the game in construction delivery. Coming back to quality that I just referenced, we've got some recent examples where this is starting to take on a life of its own post my review. So even all of these screen grabs are the last 6 weeks or so. So you would probably heard of what happened with Bovis quite recently. I suspect that's the tip of the iceberg in the house builder sector. without wanting to preempt anything. That's costing their chief executive. Big issues there around the power of social media to disrupt major corporates. And it just goes to show the house builder model, which has always been focused around buying land, build, sell, exit. Actually, it's a lot more complicated than that now for reputational reasons. So even though a house builder might not be retaining a financial interest, they have a reputational interest in looking after their customers. And traditional build has compromised that across the house building sector. This one as well is relevant for today, talking about housing associations and social housing. You probably heard about the Yorkshire Village estate in East London that Clarion, or was Circle Housing, I think it's only about 3 or 4 years old. Everything I've heard about it, both in the press and from some of the individuals involved, is that it's been pretty much condemned. Traditionally built, I'm not going to say who built it, but it's a well-known tier 1 contractor. Massive legacy issues that are coming out for people in occupation. Housing associations having to buy back product off the existing occupiers. And it, for me, systemic of some of the issues we're facing around traditional build. And then even more recently, you may have seen this around a brickwork collapse that happened on a Scottish school, which has brought concern. There's, again, a systemic failure in terms of how quality control on sites around traditional trades is waning, and that's allowed this to happen. And again, I think these all bring into focus modernise or die. It's not just about skills capacity, it's skills quality. So for me, really important point, skills and training, which is obviously a key part of what my review is about, is important, but it's subordinate to innovation. We're going to deal with the issues that I'm outlining here. We shouldn't just go straight into a discussion about how we're going to train more people. It's about what are we training them in. We have to refocus on the basic delivery models that we're going to be using, both in innovating our delivery model structures, but innovating our construction techniques and the technologies we use as well, because one decides the other. We go straight into skills and say, look, we need more bricklayers. We do need more bricklayers, but we need to do a lot more as well, and that's a really important point to remember. This is the sort of relationship statement that I like to use, which has framed a lot of my thinking in the review around the fact that I think failure in our industry is very much down to 4 things. The fact we bespoke every design that we do. We just reinvent the wheel every time. Very little of standardisation opportunities is harnessed. And that doesn't mean we have to cookie cutter everything. We can do things around a commonality platform and address it very individually so it looks unique. We just don't harness those opportunities. I think there's a direct relationship between the risk of failure and the number of man hours worked on a construction site. So the more you can do off-site in a factory environment, the more certain the outcome is going to be. And I think there's a whole piece around fragmentation, vertically and horizontally. So the more layers you have vertically, clients, the main contractor, the subcontractor, the subcontractor, the supplier, the more on-costing there is and the more risk of failure. The more horizontal divergence around trade contractors working in different silos, the more risk there is of coordination failure on site. So for me, that encapsulates everything that I'm trying to drive, which is changing the way we design and construct, designing with manufacture and install in mind, reducing the interfaces and challenging the value chain, increase the pre-manufactured value. PMV is something I talk a lot about in my review. I try to define it. I know we're going to hear a bit more about that. My view on what this is that. It's the total construction price of a job less everything that's done on site, effectively. It leaves a residual, which is everything that's done off site. The higher that is as a percentage of your build, my view is the more certain your job is going to be around its outcome, and it will be of potentially of a high quality, dealing with the issues I just mentioned around in situ site working. So what does that mean around how we have to work? We have to work differently. It's more collaborative, it takes digital technology going forward, it's about creativity, but, and there's lots of people talking about BIM at the moment, and I'm a massive supporter of BIM, don't get me wrong, and my review is very supportive of it. BIM has a glass ceiling if you apply it in a traditional construction model. So for me, BIM, combined with traditional design and build tendering, combined with labour-intensive site processes, will only take us so far. And there's a cultural overlay on this as well around adversarial working. So for me, I don't think that is going to move us forward. It's not certainly going to step change us. We need to be thinking about how we completely reform the delivery model. Some of that is around DFMA. So design for manufacture and assembly is a critical opportunity, particularly for what you're talking about here today at the conference around the housing association sector and build to rent. Probably more so than for sale housing, because of some of the features of those sectors within the housing market are very amenable to standardisation, Again, not cookie cutter. If you take cues from the automotive industry around how this is the Volkswagen Audi group approach to life, the drivetrain part of the car, which is the pit towards the front, virtually all of that across the whole range of Volkswagen Audi motor cars is standardized at component level, and they just wrap the car in different bodywork and trim, etc. So they all look different, but they've got a commonality platform that massively increases their efficiency, which we can replicate in housing. And I don't think that automotive and housing are so far apart that you can't do that. You can. And the key areas you can do that are areas of high repeat: kitchens, bathrooms, risers, plant areas, even facade detailing. You can have a commonality of how you approach that. So what does pre-manufacturing look like as a terminology? It can actually be traditional trade working, but efficient traditional trade working. If you're minimising the labour hours by setting out brickwork, for instance, such that it minimises the wastage on site, or the coursing is correctly predicted, that's good. It doesn't have to be done in a factory. It can be done in a different way. You can use hybrid technology such as brick slips. You can take it to its extreme, and this is a screen grab of something that's in my review, which is called Factory in a Box. That's something that was done for GSK in the pharmaceutical sector, but actually there's now plans to do it in the residential sector, which you see some images of there, which is component level pre-manufacturing. So actually it takes the labour hour content out of residential design delivery by standardising and making it easier to put stuff together on site. Still using traditional materials, steel, in situ concrete, etc., but actually reducing the risk of failure. It also can include what I would term flying factories, or factories on site. This is something we're working with at the moment in my business at East Village in Stratford for Qatari Diyar Delancey. One of the plots there is being built. Mace are currently building plot NO8 using what they're calling a jump factory. So effectively they're encapsulating three floors of what's going to be a medium to high-rise building, and they're fitting out, and they're going to jump that factory, if you like. It's a big enclosure, while the building's still being completed above. So you're creating a factory environment in situ. So that is pre-manufacturing. It doesn't have to be done 100 miles away in a remote factory. Then you get on to some of the more usual things that you'd associate. So precasting and brick slips, I think that's Lang O'Rourke. That is composite facade assembly. I think that's Herx, which is a Dutch company working on some of the Ballamore stuff in London at the moment. Then you've got the Lang O'Rourke DFMA precasting model. That's 251 Elephant Road. And then you've got the CLT market as well, the flat pack CLT market, which seems to be taking on quite a prominence at the moment. And then you take it further into volumetric three-dimensional pre-manufacturing, so pre-manufactured plant rooms, pre-manufactured bathroom pods, kitchen cartridges, entire units. All of those are just graduations on the theme. My review's pretty agnostic around what's right, what's wrong. Every scheme will have its own solution, which is right. There's also then the development of what I call precision engineered, and this is really important around, if we're going to move the sector forward, we have to address the public perception issues of prefab being poor quality. It's 21st century precision engineering. I take a cue here from the Sekisui factory in Japan. I'm not saying the Sekisui model, which is circa 40,000 units a year in Japan, is the right one for the UK. The way that they buy housing and treat housing is different, but the principles are the same, and I think you'll see that with this. This is going to be one of the biggest disruptions in the UK housing market, certainly in my career. This is coming. I'm involved behind the scenes on some of this stuff, so I know what's coming. And even though there's a lot of people out there thinking it'll never work and it's not going to happen, it is going to happen, and it is going to be a game changer, and everyone should watch this space. So how do you get all of that to happen? We need to change the way that the industry reacts to, firstly, what it asks for from the industry. Clients and advisors, and that is a double-edged statement around clients and their consultants, have to change what they ask the industry to do. The industry finds it really difficult to actually innovate itself because of all the issues that I set out elsewhere in my review around low margins, lack of investment incentive, etc. Clients have to start this in many respects. Otherwise, we're going to go around this vicious circle of asking for the same things, getting the same answer time and time again. I think there's three areas where we're going to get that. Disruption, a la LNG. Some progressive clients going out there and taking the leap of faith, that is happening. And then government starting to influence, that's happening as well. I'll come back to that. So just coming on to what's happened since the review. Conscious of time, how long have I got? Okay, I'm going to speed through this now. Right, I think my slide pack Is that going to be available to everyone? So I'm just going to go through at pace now just to talk about what's happened since the review around policy and some of the real measures. So there's a lot of noise still, which is good. The more noise there is for me, and the longer it lasts, the more people are talking about driving change. Don't have to agree with what I'm saying, just let's debate it, let's get it out there. For all the reasons I've just set out, this is pretty important. We cannot let this chance slip to transform how we work. Government has listened, and I've been very pleased with the reaction from all parts of government. I was nervous when the review first came out that actually it was going to be not endorsed, but it's been increasingly endorsed by some of the things that I'll come on to in a second. There's a CITB review, and that's more of a skills debate. I'm not going to major on that now, and you probably will know that Paul Morrell is currently leading a review of CITB at the moment, and you'll hear more about that in the near future. I've given evidence to the CLG Select Committee. For me, it's really important we try and drive this message cross-party. It's not, even though the Tories are in power, Labour need to understand this as well, such that if we have any change in government, however unlikely it might seem at the moment, we need to get that cross-party thinking around what the industry needs. I'm also sitting on a APPG for Brexit. That's why I'm really nervous about the further overlay on Brexit on all the issues we have. And I think it's important. I know there's lots of talk about Brexit and the leak that came out in the press last week about construction's priority. Yeah, we don't want any structural shocks, but we need to take this as an opportunity to transform ourselves as well. It's actually a good stimulus for change. We've got new disruptors coming in. We've got some clients, big clients actually, including house builders, starting to look at this as a real alternative because they're worried about labour security. It's not a positive incentive for change, it's a negative one, but I don't care. Actually, it's going to drive us in the same direction. And relevant for this discussion today, the RP market, I can see some really good signs of how that's being taken forward. This came out last week. For me, really important. It stimulated the build-to-rent sector. So those of you who work in that sector, massively important, I believe, in establishing the principles around how a pre-manufactured sector is going to grow. We need more stable demand. We need clients with big programs of work, institutional capital at scale, coming into the sector that is more acyclical. So people are renting. The rental velocity on schemes is greater and more constant than the sales velocity, which is more macroeconomic dependent. And I believe it's re-energised the affordable housing sector. So even though it hasn't done everything that the HAs perhaps would have wanted, it's been supportive. And I think you'll see more tenure diversity. Potentially, if you can time that could be counter-cyclical. So the government can turn up the gas in a housing downturn. All of that creates more certainty around demand, enables more stimulation of off-site investment. Specific references in the white paper to the work I've done, particularly around skills. Interestingly, it talks about future skills. Doesn't talk about skills now, it's future skills. That's really important. The government wants the industry to sort itself out for what it needs in the future, not training just more bricklayers and carpenters. Big piece, very big piece on innovation. So again, white paper is massively supportive of this, and that's played out. HCA obviously has a role outside of London for distributing funds. So Eddie Lister has been quite muscular in his support of Offsite and modern methods. If you've got time, I would suggest you go on Parliament Live TV and listen to probably the first 20 minutes of that, which was his evidence last week, I believe. Some very clear cues as to how interventionist the HCA is going to be to pump prime the off-site market in using public land and in supporting how RPs use their grant and in distributing the funds already allocated either through the Home Building Fund or the Accelerated Construction Programme. The industrial strategy, again, massively important. The timing of all this is a bit of a sort of coming together of lots of things. This is a massively important document for construction. Two elements, developing skills, future skills again. This is not more of the same. Brexit, as I say, I'm pretty certain that the leak that came out in the Times last week about the priority of construction perception for the sector from government is right. I don't think we're going to get any special deals. You're going to get a bit of ring fencing, I think, around certain trades where there would be a structural shock if we lost that EU labour. But I think the government's going to take it as an opportunity to say to construction, sort yourself out. Don't be reliant on the migrant labour model, change your productive techniques, and actually that links to the 8th of the 10 pillars in the industrial strategy, which is government, it wants the industry to respond en masse. And there's a big piece here for the Construction Leadership Council, which is really the mouthpiece of the whole industry going back to government to go back and say what it needs to transform itself. And it links to developing those skills, it links massively into innovation. In London, So actually most of what I'm doing in policy terms is more advanced in London. So this is a document that came out, which is the £3.15 billion of funding for London's affordable housing programme is already out there. It's referenced the work I've done. There's some interesting discussions going on, which will probably move on this year around how that's going to play out. Again, pump priming the sector using this registered provider market. So the G15 RPs, some really interesting opportunities, how they can link into pre-manufacturing. Just closing now. So how are we going to train all the people that are going to work in this new sector? There's no real specific courses at the moment. This is a great case study of work of a project that's being built at the moment up in Dudley, in just west of Birmingham. Dudley Advanced 2 is purely going to be training MVQ level apprenticeships for the pre-manufacturing sector and retraining existing tradesmen to work in a factory environment. This is a massively important milestone. It's probably going to be one of the first institutes of technology that Theresa May set out in the Green Paper that's focused on construction, just purely advanced construction. And just finishing off, 2 case studies for this audience here about build to rent and HA. This is a job I'm very lucky to be working on. Essentially Living, one of my clients, took the leap of faith and said, do you know what, we're not doing it traditionally. We're going to build Greenwich, Creekside, which is the scheme here that you can see. We're going to do it using pre-manufacturing. They've decided to use volumetric. They're using Elements as a volumetric module supplier. They then decided what's the delivery model. They haven't gone main contracting because they couldn't make it to work. It's too expensive. So they've set up their own captive arm's length CM company. You can call it that, an integrator company called Inc. The price is about 10% cheaper, massively quicker. They're in control. It's scalable. This is where the links to the build-to-rent sector are massively important for how off-site manufacture could be cultivated by long-term programmatic clients. Great to see what Swan are doing over in Basildon, just setting up a new factory to service I think it's the Craydale housing estate regeneration in Basildon. So they're setting up a factory, they're using CLT. They're going to pre-assemble CLT in that factory. New Living is the brand they're using, highly scalable. They can sell that to other RPs or collaborate around borrowed scale. And then finally, LNG, obviously what they're doing is very much in the press. They have a joint venture with PGGM, a Dutch fund, doing build-to-rent. I'm sure they're going to be deploying their system into that build-to-rent portfolio, plus lots of other stuff that they're doing as well. I'm going to end there because there's a lot more material here, so I think you can share the slides separately, but hopefully I've given you a flavour of why my review is relevant for build-to-rent and housing associations that I'm sure will be explored later in the day. Thank you.